She said 34 At 30, just give me an odd.
I'll sit there. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right next door. I can leave the cell number, but I can. How about being here? Yeah, I'm willing to assess it.
That I realized. I can imagine.
Well, yeah. Sí, que se ve bien Bueno, se ven no solo la mente, pero también
Probably easiest to do it in Delaware, like everything else in the world.
I just saw your thing about groups. I need to encourage the whole groups.
I don't know if I was supposed to have done that or what.
No, I don't think anybody has. I don't think anybody's.
I just saw like a post.
But I definitely want the groups.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Good.
This is a really interesting. Do you know the story?
Oh, I just was like,
It's really interesting.
telling. I would be interested maybe in what
Yeah.
how is it connected to another city?
It's in Georgia. I don't know if maybe there's some students there who work there or something. But I know the executive director is from Georgia. I don't think she's here. Right. She's my Facebook friend, that's all I know. I mean, I don't really know her. I don't know how she ended up as my Facebook friend. How bizarre.
I think that's pretty common with Facebook
Yeah.
friends. Like,
I think so too. Like anything in like immigration. I was like, no thank you. Advocacy. Did you have a good break?
Oh, I did, yeah. I ended up traveling around the East Coast, just visiting my sister and my parents in Portland, DC, and New York.
That's great.
Yeah. Did you get any time?
No, I used it to like catch up on stuff that I had to go to New York. I had to go to DC, for work stuff, like stuff that I've been putting off for the class. Haven't been able to for my other jobs. Yeah, no, for my job. It's all one. It's all one. Yeah. It's good. Busy.
I just sort of I've been wanting to go to more like events here.
Yeah.
Like, I don't live near campus, so I've been like looking at the emails a little closer.
Right. It's challenging when you find time.
That's my one Saturday in fall that I'm one Saturday in fall. I'm not going.
I was telling the advisors still saying
Oh yeah.
about our class.
Oh really?
Oh, I just had never heard of it. And he might need one.
Yeah.
He was
I
just
knew
like,
him too.
oh,
Do you know if he's still married to Adria? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I used to work for her a long time ago. Way back. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was a master's student here, she ran something called I'm not sure it's still exists. It's called the Harvard Education Marathon, and I worked as a writer. Yeah. And now she's at job search.
I'm good to be offended.
She had created. Yeah, so I've actually met him. He may just not remember me. I got the master's first, and then I took a year off and worked on a book, and then I came here as a doctor. Right. 24 hours. I didn't go to law school. I'm not a lawyer. I just work over there. Yeah. I don't fit in over there at all. But I work with a lot of civil rights lawyers. So that's how I ended up there. So it's like...
Well, good evening, and welcome to this Civic and Moral Education Initiative event. I'm Helen Haste. I'm one of the co-conveners of the CMEI initiative. I'd also like to introduce to Gemma Ross, who organises things for us, and she'll be passing around a sign-up sheet. And if you're not already on the mailing list for CMEI, please do this with your email address. But in any case, if you still are on the mailing list, please write your name so we do your work. We're very pleased today to have an interesting team of people who've been working in very important areas to represent Freedom University, which I'll say a bit more about shortly. We have our first speaker, and then we have some commentary from people who are involved in the organisation. And then we'll have time for discussion towards the end. And please help yourself to lots of it in the time. So again, welcome to the board, taking into our team speaker. Thank you. Let's start off with the background, and then I'll introduce our speakers. In 2010, the Georgia Board of Regents passed policy 4.1.6, banning undocumented youth from attending Georgia's top 5 public universities, and policy 4.3.4, which prohibits undocumented students from qualifying for in-state tuition. Freedom University was founded in response to these discriminatory policies in 2011. Based in Atlanta, Freedom University is widely considered a modern-day freedom school that provides rigorous college-level classes, scholarship assistance, and leadership development for undocumented students in Georgia. At its core, Freedom University is a community of students, bright, fearless, and compassionate young people who are determined to fight for their human rights in education. And we have right here come from Freedom University. So our team of speakers, I'm going to give you quite detailed bios for them because I think they're all very interesting. I think it's nice to hear the full story, so that it takes a couple of minutes to describe them because there's a lot of material to say, and I think it's important that you know about them. The first presentation will be Laura Amico Soltis, who serves as the Executive Director of Freedom University, where she teaches human rights and documentary photography. She builds bridges with documented student ally organizations and fosters intergenerational relationships between undocumented students and veterans of the Black Freedom Movement. Having served as a long-term student activist, Emiko is committed to mentoring undocumented youth and providing them with the knowledge and skills they need to be effective leaders in their own freedom struggle. Professor Soltis received her bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia, where she was awarded the Foundation Fellowship. Emiko received her PhD from Emory University and wrote a dissertation on the human rights strategies and cultural practices of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, an interracial farm worker movement organization in South Florida. Emiko was raised in rural Minnesota in a mixed-race family and identifies as second-generation immigrants. Her research and teaching include social movement theory, globalization theory, transnational advocacy networks, farm worker movements, racial formation theory, music and social movements, and documented photography. You're never to sleep. So he's very impressive. We're very much hearing from. The panelists, Melissa Rivas Triana, put your hand up, Melissa, is an undocumented student from Aguascalientes, Mexico. She came to the United States at the age of 2 and graduated from Brookwood High School in Snellville, Georgia, in 2012. She joined Freedom University in the fall of 2012 and has since been working with her classmates to rescind policy 4.1.6 and to achieve equal access to higher education for undocumented students in Georgia. She represented Freedom University at the U.S. Human Rights Network's National Conference in 2013 and has participated in numerous panel discussions at institutions, including Emory University, Georgia State University, Hampshire College, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. With Freedom University, she has helped organize multiple direct actions against the discriminatory ban of undocumented students at the top institutions of higher learning in Georgia. At Freedom University's most recent direct action, on January 9th, at the University of Georgia, she was arrested, along with 8 other students, for staging a sit-in after successfully holding the first integrated class with documented and undocumented students in recent history. She plans to study anthropology and art history in future, along with continuing her involvement with Freedom University and activism. Second panelist is Jacqueline Delgadillo, who is a student at Freedom University. Jacqueline is an elected member of Freedom University Student Committee. She served on the media team of a major civil disobedience action at the University of Georgia and has testified before the Georgia Senate Committee on Higher Education in favor of in-state tuition for undocumented students. An active activist through Freedom University, she aspires to be accepted into college and to continue her education, and we wish her very well. Gerardo Ochoa is an MA candidate in higher education here, HGSE. He's from Samara, Michoacan, Mexico. He graduated from the University of Oregon with a major in sociology and minor in Latin American history. Mr. Ochoa has extensive experience working with underrepresented youth in higher education, primarily Latinos in the middle school, high school, and undergraduate level. His most recent endeavors involve working with students to provide them with the tools, resources, and motivation to successfully apply and compete for scholarship funding, an essential element to completing a college education. Mr. Ochoa is a contributing head author of Path to Scholarship, a college edition, and works directly with Oregon high schools, non-profit organizations, colleges, and universities to implement the Path to Scholarship curriculum. In addition, since 2004, he's been with the Bloomfield College in Portland campus, where he's currently the Associate Director of Financial Aid. Anaya Mendoza of Harvard College was born in Mexico City and came to the United States at the age of 4. She went on to graduate Mobilizing in Santa Maria High School and is currently a senior at Harvard University, concentrating in social studies. At Harvard, she is Director Emeritus of Harvard College Act on the Dream, an organization dedicated to advocating for immigration reform and providing resources for undocumented students. At the college, she is a volunteer interpreter for the Harvard Law School Immigration and Refugee Clinic, conducts research as a QUOI Fellow, and co-founded Manifesto magazine, Harvard's only feminist magazine. Really? As a result of her advocacy for immigrant and women's rights, Anaya was named one of Harvard's 15 most interesting seniors by the Harvard Crimson. Throughout her college career, Anaya has held various internships ranging from interning to the Dianne Feinstein's Washington, D.C. office to helping coordinate the fight for the immigration Senate bill in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2013. In the summer of 2014, she was honored by the White House Champion of Change. She plans to pursue a joint degree in law and public policy and a career in impact in education. This is an amazingly interesting, brave, and stellar panel, and I wanted to welcome you. I'm turning now over to our first speaker, Laura Amico, who will talk for about 30 minutes, and we'll have commentary from panelists, and then we'll move over to discussion.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? First, I just want to thank Rachel Friedman and Jonah Ross for so graciously organizing this and helping us to get here today, and for the Harvard Graduate School of Education for helping to sponsor our visit. It's an honor to be here, but to be honest, it also needs to increase the volume.
Yeah, she's having difficulties hearing me.
I'm not sure how we can do it.
A bit louder, please.
Well, she doesn't like herself.
Move it up. Maybe it helps.
I don't think it's on.
I think we might be on, so we're just coming to check.
Hello, better?
Yeah.
Everyone's eyes are like this, okay. But hopefully you guys heard the thank yous. I just want to say that it's an honor to be here. And to be honest, it feels a little weird. Not only did we experience a 60-degree drop in weather this afternoon. But Melissa, Jacqueline, and I are coming from the deep south. And we're kind of used to fighting on the ground for so long that sometimes we're used to coming to events like this with our gloves and our armor on, because we don't know what questions are going to be asked, if people are going to start shouting, etc. So it's kind of strange to feel welcome and safe. So thank you. Before going into the substance of my talk on undocumented student access to higher education, I think it's important to articulate my social positioning. Thank you for the very detailed introduction. I didn't know that was happening. But I want to emphasize that I'm speaking to you as a teacher who serves undocumented students, and I've taught at Freedom U for 2 years now. I also speak as a former student who, despite having a scary college experience as a first-generation college student, I still believe that higher education has the potential to deepen our consciousness and ignite our commitment to the public good. I speak as a longtime social justice activist as well, who strongly believes in the power of young people who are organized. Everything I know about undocumented students, I've learned from them. I am not an immigration expert. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a policy analyst, and I'm not a professional public speaker. I'm actually used to doing this and getting them to laugh and running around, and that's what I do. So I appreciate your patience with me. So let's get to undocumented students and access to higher education. How many of you are familiar more or less with this issue on a nationwide basis? More or less? Okay. So just to set some standards and statistics, there are 11.2 undocumented immigrants to the United States today. About 2.1 million are college-age young people who would qualify for the DREAM Act. Each year, more than 65,000 undocumented students graduate from high school who have lived here for more than 5 years. The organization Educators for Fair Consideration note that most college-bound undocumented students, one, have lived in the U.S. for most of their lives. Melissa, for example, moved here when she was 2. They were, 2, brought to the U.S. by their parents at a very young age. 3, most have attended kindergarten through high school in the United States. 4, they currently lack a way to become legal residents or citizens in the United States. And lastly, most have excelled academically in high school and want to pursue a college education. Yet, despite this, undocumented students face enormous barriers to higher education. One major thing is preparation. There's a severe lack of mentoring in high schools for any type of mentor or counselor who knows about policies in their state, what options are available for undocumented students. And oftentimes, undocumented students are first-generation college-bound students in their family, and so oftentimes they aren't familiar with what options there are, what types of colleges are available to them, or financial aid by any means. 2, another barrier is economic barriers. Undocumented students overwhelmingly come from low-income families, but they're prohibited from accessing all forms of federal financial aid, meaning Pell Grants, federal work-study, and federal loans. And then 3rd, fear. There's a very real fear of sharing detailed information about their legal status and that of everyone in their family. You're required to put that on most college applications. So those are kind of the 3 main areas I see as significant barriers to higher education. As most of you guys know, in 1982, the Supreme Court ruled in Plyler v. Doe that all students are guaranteed a K-12 free public education. But this did not extend to higher education. So it has been up to states to determine their policies regarding undocumented students' access to higher education. To date, this changes constantly, but to date, 16 states have passed legislation allowing undocumented students to qualify for in-state tuition. And this includes Texas, California, Utah, Washington, New York, and many others. And 5 states offer in-state tuition based on decisions by their state boards of education or their state attorney general. And that includes Hawaii, Michigan, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, and Virginia. So all other states require undocumented students, even if they meet state residency requirements, to pay out-of-state tuition, which is on average about 60% more than in-state tuition. And only 3 states in the country have an admissions ban against undocumented students. Can you guess where they might be? The South. Okay, so it's Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia are the only 3 states to have an admissions ban. Alabama and South Carolina is a full ban, and Georgia's a little weird for lots of reasons. One is that they have a ban on the top 5 public universities, and an in-state tuition ban for the rest. And in-state tuition, again, out-of-state tuition is about 60% more than in-state tuition. So that brings us to Georgia. As Dr. Hayes mentioned, in 2010, the Georgia Board of Regents passed Policy 416, which again is that ban on the top 5 public universities, and Policy 434, which is the in-state tuition ban. I think it's really important to understand this ban in context as well. It followed HB 87, which was a House bill in Georgia. That was a Arizona HB 1070 copycat bill, which was a very, very harsh anti-immigration bill. One section of it, Section 7, made it a felony to harbor or help and assist undocumented immigrants in any way, meaning driving them or helping them. Luckily, that was struck down by a judge, but that included basically a $20,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence, which would make most Freedom U faculty and volunteers like lifetime prison inmates. So that's the situation in Georgia. And so in 2011, this is when the policies went into place. But at the same time these policies were passed, the Residency Verification Committee also reported their findings on undocumented youth in Georgia. The committee was charged with investigating 3 concerns that the board had to pass these policies. One, that the university system was being swamped by thousands of undocumented immigrants. That's the first concern. The second was that Georgia taxpayers were subsidizing the education of these students through in-state tuition. And 3, that undocumented students were taking seats away from academically qualified Georgians. Those were the 3 concerns as stated by the Georgia Board of Regents. The results of their investigation, ironically, proved all of these concerns to be unfounded. The committee found that of the 310,000 students enrolled in the University of System of Georgia, 501 students, which is less than 0.2%, 0.16%, were undocumented. Of the top 5 universities, there were 27, which is less than 0.01% of the student body. So the concern that the system was being swamped by thousands and thousands of undocumented immigrants was a gross exaggeration. The committee also found that of the 501 undocumented students, every single one was paying out-of-state tuition. In other words, they were subsidizing the education of all of their classmates, most of whom they went to kindergarten through 12th grade with. And the third concern, that undocumented students take away seats from academically qualified Georgians, is one already with a predetermined answer that can't be statistically proven or disproven, since if there's a case of one academically qualified Georgian who doesn't get in, it's disproven. But it's important that the wording implies, one, that there is a criminality of undocumented students who takes away things from other people, that undocumented students can't be Georgians, and 3, that undocumented students cannot be academically qualified. That's all implied in that fear. The real issue, of course, is the ethical question of whether or not documentation status should be the basis of discrimination in admissions. Those who oppose the ban argue that differential treatment in the field of academia should be limited to addressing intellectual aptitude, not denying upward mobility to a racial and ethnic minority based on unsubstantiated allegations and circumstances that are beyond one's control. So with these policies, Policy 416 and 434, Georgia has effectively ushered in a new era of educational segregation in the South, where exclusion to admissions is based on racial fears and social status, rather than academic merit. And it is really telling that the same 5 universities that ban undocumented students are the exact same 5 that banned African American students in 1961. So that's the doom and gloom part of the story. And here's the fun part. That in response to this, people weren't just like, students organized. Undocumented students organized in their communities and reached out to sympathetic documented allies and professors. And a lot of this was happening at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, which is about an hour and a half northeast of Atlanta. And a lot of undocumented students found 4 awesome faculty at UGA who were outspoken about this ban. And they met up and had this crazy idea that maybe they could do what they do best, and that is teach. So they decided to found a university where they could continue their college education in defiance of the ban. And those 4 professors also were women, which is not surprising. So these 4 women, these undocumented students, started this underground university. They started it the same year the ban went into place. And those 4 professors really risked their jobs by doing this because the UGA was not a sympathetic campus to this issue and still isn't. The name Freedom University was chosen for 2 reasons. One, it reflected the legacy of Southern freedom schools and by prioritizing education for liberation, not solely accreditation. Freedom U is not an accredited university. We're pretty underground. And 2, students realized that Freedom University also had a great acronym with a joke that never really got old. So this is Colbert and Juno Diaz, who served on our board of directors. But it just makes for really great T-shirts. Ours just says "FU Georgia," and we have the FU singers, and yes, it never gets old. And we are now in our 4th year. We started it in the fall of 2011. And Freedom University continues to serve as a tuition-free, modern-day freedom school that provides college-level classes, college application and scholarship assistance, and leadership development for undocumented students in Georgia. I need a sip of water. Today, our classes are filled with about 30 to 35 students who are generally ages 16 through 24, most college-age students. And most were brought to the United States as children, sometimes infants, from countries such as Mexico, which is primarily where most students come from, but also Guatemala, El Salvador, Uruguay, South Korea, and Jamaica, usually in their family's effort to escape political violence or ensure their economic survival. This year, our 6 faculty members really reflect the diversity of our students. They identify either as African American or 1st and 2nd generation immigrants of Latin American, Asian, or Afro-Caribbean descent. Our college preparation professor, Maria Araguin, is also a former Dreamer herself. And this semester, we offer 4 courses, including music performance in the group, the Freedom University Singers, FU Singers, Human Rights in the United States, that's a class I teach, Race, Immigration, and Incarceration, Debate and Public Speaking, taught by Ed Lee, who's the director of debate at Emory, and College Survival Skills. And one way we also tackle discrimination in higher education is by directly preparing students for college and advocating for them on their behalf. And we are successful in what we do. While the state is funneling undocumented youth either into low-wage jobs or the private, highly profitable immigrant detention system, Freedom University is undercutting this school-to-prison and detention pipeline and trying to replace it with the school-to-college pipeline. Yes, so 1 out of 5 students that comes to Freedom U banned from higher ed leaves with a full ride scholarship to a college out of state. These colleges include Dartmouth, Syracuse, Hampshire, Tougaloo, and Berea, which do not discriminate against undocumented students and meet full financial need for academically qualified students. In addition, some students don't want to go to college. They are there because they want to learn. They like being in the safe space of other undocumented students. So we try to help place them in jobs in Atlanta or with social justice organizations. And this is from our last trip. Melissa and her twin sister, Ashley, we're on this tour as well. This was back in November, and we toured a lot of the colleges in Pioneer Valley that accept undocumented students. And to go back to the idea of the Freedom School model is really important in understanding what we do. Again, we provide a liberatory education, which can be understood as education for action. And it really has 3 components to it. One is providing, above all, a safe space for undocumented students where they can really have a positive identity formation. 2 is consciousness raising. And 3 is cultivating a belief among our students that things can change through collective action. And those were really fundamental to the Southern Freedom Schools as well. I think I'm going to close this story. So a safe space. Freedom U is always really scary in September for teachers and students because we don't know each other. Students have joked that they think it's a trap, that ICE is going to come in and sweep them all away. But we don't publicize where we meet anywhere. It's really among our students and through their networks and our really tight-knit group of volunteer drivers. So above all, it's a safe space. And it's not only a safe space for learning, but cultivating a sense of a positive identity in who they are as human beings. And it's not a surprise that in this safe space, students oftentimes feel safe to come out as queer as well. The term undocuqueer sometimes given to their identity as well. And also where women are always being pinched by professors to just stand up. You might not be used to it in classrooms, but talk. It's not a surprise that the three of us who came here are also women. That's pretty common at Freedom U. So in addition to a safe space, that concept of consciousness raising. And what that means is it's very much inspired by Paulo Freire as well about a liberatory education. And this is based on the idea that we can use undocumented students' life experiences as sources of knowledge and analysis so they can identify the root causes of the injustice and exclusion that they face. And hopefully find intersections with other social justice struggles that are connected to their own. One example of this is DACA. Most people are familiar with this, right? Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA was a memorandum passed by the Obama administration in June 2012, which grants undocumented students temporary relief from deportation through something called prosecutorial discretion. And it enables undocumented students who meet certain age requirements and when they arrived to be eligible for a driver's license and for a work permit. Most students come and they're so excited that they have DACA. They feel like they can contribute to their families by working, help around the house, and drive siblings places and everything. But this concept of consciousness raising is really important because we have a critical perspective of everything, but even DACA, right? For example, understanding DACA in a state like Georgia, it has effectively created a social system and recreated a social system where there is an entire population of young people who can drive to low-wage jobs, but are still denied access to higher education and the right to vote. It's eerily similar to Jim Crow in many ways. So DACA effectively channels a population into low-wage jobs for the rest of their lives, where they can be easily exploited for cheap labor, but being politically powerless to change it through institutionalized means. And in a society where education is increasingly essential to economic mobility, this denial of the right to education deeply exacerbates existing economic and social inequalities. And we discuss this in our classes, and students make the connection of their place in a long and dark history in the United States of securing cheap labor of people of color through various forms of discrimination, through migration, labor importation programs, immigration, and new categories of illegality. When this consciousness is developed, for example, they're really able to make sense of why they and their families are recruited into sectors, labor sectors, that are denied basic labor rights, such as farm labor, domestic labor, right? And making those historical connections to the African American community. In 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, for example, this was a deal that was struck between Northern and Southern senators of how to pass a National Labor Relations Act by excluding two groups of workers, farm workers and domestic laborers, because 66% of them were black, right? Those laws and those exceptions haven't changed, and they have largely been replaced by undocumented Latino workers, right? So making these connections are really important, not only for understanding their positioning now, but also how they're connected to other movements and other communities. And this connects to kind of the final thing, is that we try to cultivate through this liberatory education a belief that that's just not how the way the world is, that it can be changed if they organize and they mobilize. And we do that, sorry, this was the slide that I was supposed to show, through leadership development and movement skill building. This is Valentina. In April 2014, she had joined Freedom U about 2 weeks before. And this happens to a lot of our students. They come in super quiet, super scared. 2 or 3 weeks later, they're like leading marches of 5,000 people. So that's what happens like when you feel like you're in a safe space, and that you can do something to change your situation. And central to this leadership development in our classroom specifically has been connecting the undocumented student struggle in regards to education to veterans of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. A lot of those veterans are in their mid to late 70s now, but they are still extremely active and do come to our class and give lectures. that's actually a funny term. It turns into a strategy session within like 2 minutes. But developing that intergenerational, that interracial dialogue is really, really key. And I know that in all the classes that I've taught, when the SNCC activists come in, that's when the whole semester changes, right? In the classroom, they just end up talking more, getting more excited. And then when there's opportunities for actions, way more students participate, right? And I think that's important because they get to learn directly from those who fought to desegregate Georgia public universities the first time around, and know that it was students who led that fight and that they won. Jacqueline's right there. This was October 2013, and Charles Black, who is of the Atlanta Student Movement, which was an affiliate of SNCC, and Constance Curry, who was the first white female to be elected to the SNCC board, came to our class. And of course, we ended up teaching them the SNCC freedom song style and teaching some freedom songs that day too. So that cultural knowledge is passed on as well, which is really key. In addition to our classes, we've also been had the honor of interacting with other SNCC activists, with last year being the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer, which was awesome. And it was in Jackson, Mississippi. Why we went down to Mississippi in like late June, I don't know. It was really, 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 really hot. But 9 of us went down to Jackson, Mississippi for a week-long conference, and it was just incredible. We went to so many different panels, discussions, debates, film screenings, dinners, and we've just hung out with like the coolest 70-year-olds in the world. And this is Rita Schwerner-Bender, Mickey Schwerner's widow, and she was a groupie of Freedom U and just followed us wherever we went and said hey. And this is Hollis Watkins, is his name, doing the Dougie with us, which was great. So it was really unexpected, all the friendships that happened during that summer as well. But this is, again, one of the learning opportunities that Freedom U students experience beyond the classroom. And I want to kind of have the last section of this talk to be really visual. It's really important to be able to see and imagine what our students are experiencing. And it's actually one of our strategies that we have too, is making undocumented students visible and using visual means such as photography to make their experiences visible to the public. In the fall of 2013, we had a class for the Freedom University Photo Project. This is actually Melissa's photo submission, and this is her older sister. Both of them have worked at McDonald's for several years since graduating high school. And I think this picture says everything about doing well in high school, having great grades, awesome SAT scores, and being excluded from higher education. And I think Melissa's artist statement said DACA is wonderful. I can drive, I can work. But with a driver's license, but without an education, where can I really go? This was Osvaldo's submission. And we had our opening at the Hammond's House Museum, which is an African-American museum art museum in Atlanta, on Human Rights Day 2013. And that day, he was talking about the importance of his identity and participating in immigrant rights movements, but also he came out as gay during that presentation as well, and said that that's why this photo is really important to him as well, but that immigrants and the LGBTQ community need to come out together. This is another conversation, but we are working hard to change policies at Emory, which is not only the largest employer in Atlanta, but one of the most prestigious universities in the South, who does not have an inclusive policy for undocumented students yet. But one of the first ways into Emory and having undocumented student stories be told was having the exhibition at Emory. This was during King Week 2014, and we had a discussion with Bernard Lafayette, who's a freedom rider as well. And in addition to that, is another visual component is our direct actions. Luckily, with social media, we can generate a lot of the visual images that news organizations take from us. So we're actually doing the framing visually as well. And this direct action, and I think you guys should be paying attention to what the students are trying to communicate through visual means, right? This is Giovanni. He was arrested with another student when they disrupted the Georgia Board of Regents public meeting, their quarterly meeting, in the fall of 2013. And I love this photo. because it says everything, the hand on the gun, arresting a student in a graduation gown, right? And he was wearing that to symbolize that not only does he hope to go to college, but this is the last step, his high school graduation gown, where their dreams were stopped. And this tradition of activism in Georgia, undocumented youth activism, is very vibrant. Beginning in 2010, 2011, undocumented students pre-DACA were getting arrested, which is really scary and seriously risked deportation. And this was in June 2011. This was an action at the University of Georgia, April 2014, where students brought the struggle to the president's office and urged him to take a stand on Policy 416. And I do want to clarify, Freedom University is not a movement. We are a school. But as a school that teaches students to be leaders and to think critically about the world around them, it's no coincidence that most undocumented students on the front lines of the struggle in Georgia are Freedom U students. So keep that in mind, we're not a movement. And we actually are always encouraging students, while Freedom U can be kind of an organizing space, you need to have your own autonomous organization that's run by students, right, not teachers, because we always mess everything up. This was May 2014 at another Georgia Board of Regents meeting, and this was the first action where undocumented students and allies were arrested together. I think this photo you can see as well, the age range was 16 from our student Deanna, who was still in high school, to 77-year-old Joe Beasley, Reverend Joe Beasley, who's standing up. He said, if I sit down, I will never be able to get back up again. So he stood there with his 416 sign. 3 other activists from Moral Monday, and me, who at the last moment sat down because I had to. And so this was May of last year. And this is to lead up to one of our most recent actions, which was this past January 9th. It was the 55th anniversary of the desegregation, 54th anniversary of the desegregation of UGA, and when it was integrated. And we had decided in our class that previous month that students felt comfortable enough to organize a direct action against the ban. And we had talked about the need for maybe a new tactic, the same strategy of getting in the way of civil disobedience and nonviolence, but in a way that was unexpected. We had pretty much disrupted every single Georgia Board of Regents meeting, but it was expected. And they became, like in any movement, the oppressors find a way to undercut the strategies of people doing the direct action. They start to understand how they get power, which is usually through arrests and media attention, right? And so instead of arresting people, they would just throw them outside and lock the doors, right? Which is why the last action we got arrested on a crosswalk. The charge was pedestrian in a roadway, which wasn't very cool. And so what can we do to raise awareness of this issue that is fresh, that actually shows in one image what this is about, right? Graduation gowns on a crosswalk isn't very clear what we're fighting for, right? So we had this long discussion in class on December 14th of like, what can we do? How do we express what the struggle is about in one picture? We sat and we thought and we had a discussion, and I think we came up with the idea of this ban is about removing perfectly qualified students out of classrooms. So how do we make that happen? So long story short, we said we should have an integrated class, as it should be, of documented and undocumented students. And this hasn't happened for at least 5 years at the University of Georgia since the ban went into place. So we just started strategizing and said, let's do it. And so, dug up the date of the integration of UGA, which is January 9th, 1961. And we said, okay, January 9th it is the first Friday of school of that semester. And we had maybe 3 planning meetings of about 6-7 hours each at my house, and had people in different rooms, the media team, art team, logistics, right? And so on January 9th, this is what we ended up doing. we wanted a class full of documented students from UGA, Kennesaw State, Emory University, and Freedom University students. But we said visually, how can we signal who's undocumented without racial profiling? And in a way that you can express something positive, right? So we came up with the idea of butterfly wings to express that migration is beautiful, migration is natural. And it was awesome because they forget that they have them on. They're just walking around with their wings like, what? And so Jacqueline and her brother actually came over and like with a blade cut out 16 butterflies, painted one side orange, painted one side black, and then painted the black wings. And it was a whole operation made of like paint and cardboard and ribbons. And we made these butterfly wings and had a class. It started at about 3 p.m. We knew the class was going to end at 5 p.m. And that with the building closing is how we were going to force UGA to act. So our class featured Lonnie King, who had helped desegregate UGA in 1961. He was the chair of the Atlanta Student Movement, the SNCC affiliate in Atlanta, and Loretta Ross, who is an activist with reproductive justice and women of color. And so they were our guest lecturers that day. 5 o'clock rolled around, the building closed, and we're like, that's great. And we stayed. This is Melissa actually walking into the classroom. And so we continued our normal Freedom U classes. This is Joel Thompson, who's our music director at Freedom U, and he taught freedom songs for about a good 30, 40 minutes in the tradition of the Black Freedom Movement. Here's Loretta Ross. I think this is her diagram of how many people should agree with you on a certain issue and that being okay, which was awesome. This is Melissa and her twin Ashley, too. And the room was packed. We had like way too many students, and it was super hot. And then students were really impressed. I said, give it 8 o'clock. 3 hours for UGA to freak out and try to figure out what they're going to do before they send in police. Seriously, 8:03. I was like, I was right. And that's when the police showed up, right? And so just as we thought, they gave an order of dispersal. Students who did not want to stay left, and 9 students remained. Melissa was one of them. I left because I was a bail bondswoman, and talking to moms who were going to be furious with me. That was also my job that night. And as I was leaving, I took this picture of Arisbeth. And I'm so happy I took this because if you meet her, she's the most bubbly, nice, like there's no word to describe her. She's like, oh, Arisbeth, so nice to meet you. And then that day she's like, what? And the police, I think, sensed that she was the nice one. So I heard that I left, but I heard that they went up to her and said, this is your final warning. She's like, I'm not going. I'm like, yes. Right? So even really, really, really nice, bubbly students know what they're doing. She stayed there with her wings and wasn't leaving. So at about 9 o'clock, they were arrested. This is Jacqueline's brother, Sergio. And I love the defiance in their faces, too. And this is Melissa. And about 3-4 hours later, this is when they got released from jail. I like your hat, Jacqueline. And so I'm going to close it out. I think this might be a nice discussion to have as well, but what documented students can do, either at Harvard or any other university. I think this is a really exciting movement because this is something that directly impacts all students. That there's active discrimination happening based on social status and not merit. And that it's actually kind of frustrating. I'm glad people are still learning about this, but this has been a decades-long issue, right? And colleges are still dragging their feet about admissions policies, how students can get funded. And I know that Harvard and many other Ivy Leagues colleges, Yale, Princeton, MIT have need-blind international, right? So financial aid can be met. But for colleges around the country, it's extremely difficult for undocumented students to apply and get in and afford it, right? And so this is where documented students and their advocacy is extremely important. Something that's exciting that's happening is at Emory. This last summer, there was a meetup of undocumented students from Freedom U and Emory students who just sat down and strategized what a campaign would look like and what they needed to do. And bullet point by bullet point, they've done it. And they're now currently having meetings with the president, currently meeting with the provost to try and figure out a way of fundraising to fund undocumented student scholarships, changing the website, changing student services to make it inclusive of undocumented students, make sure that they stay in school, right? But this is a tedious process, but it requires an allyship between undocumented and documented students. And there's a lot of questions that come up, right? A lot of documented students is like, we can hardly afford college either. And I said, true, but you want these students in the struggle with you. Get them in and we'll fight together, right? Because that's a larger battle. But I think the fact that there is active discrimination going on and that there are people who actively can't even apply to certain colleges, we need to tackle that. Maybe not first, but it should be high on our list. But I'll end with that. And if you do want to know specific things you can do in terms of Freedom U in Georgia, I know it seems really far away. But Melissa, 8 other students who make up the Freedom 9, they have a court date coming up in May. UGA is still actively pursuing their criminal charges. If you can contact Jerry Moorhead and say, hey, I'm a student at Harvard, I heard about what you're doing, get your act together, drop the charges, why don't you take a stance against Policy 416? And that's his email, President Jerry Moorhead, and his phone number. These are publicly listed. You won't be calling his house. You can do that if you want. Also, for in your own classes, to write op-eds as much as you can about Georgia, about the larger national issues, and have these discussions in your classes. What I think is kind of missing and people are starting to do is researching best practices for other colleges to accept and provide scholarships for undocumented students. The sad thing about student movements is the turnover is so fast that sometimes, seniors have these really great plans and then all of a sudden it goes into thin air, right? So that this has to be a nationwide student coalition and movement. And then obviously to be working directly with undocumented students who obviously know what their challenges are and can really help work in solidarity with documented students in this collective movement. You guys all got that phone number and email down? Okay, so this is how you can keep in touch. Twitter, FU Georgia, Freedom U Georgia is our Facebook page, and our website. Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you, Emika.
Of course.
It's very stimulating and provocative. I make sure you have all got this information. I want to call now on Melissa because we want to ask you. I want Melissa to come to the front. And, I think we'd like to ask you describe your experiences on January 9th and what does it mean to be an activist? What does it mean?
Testing.
Why is it important, you think, that for Freedom University students to be leaders to change in Georgia? So there's a set of questions for you.
Right. So on January 9th, I can just saying, excuse me, I'm kind of sick right now, so if I sound like Squidward, I apologize. So on January 9th, I decided that I was going to make the conscious decision to put myself at risk of being arrested because I decided that I wanted to stop being a passive observer to the injustices that not only had shaped my life thus far, but had shaped the lives of my peers. And I really think that's what it means to be an activist. Growing up as an undocumented student in Georgia, my parents really taught me the only way they knew how to survive, and that in Georgia it means to stay hidden. And it means to not ask questions, to not draw attention to yourself, because you're already breaking the law by being here. You don't want to break any other law and get deported. So coming from that history and going into Freedom University, that's when I really learned that these are the injustices that are happening in my life. And that's when I actually learned that my right to an education is actually something that we all deserve as human beings. And I really learned that what I could actually do to change that and to make that a reality and what I should do. Because I think when I learned the reality, and I learned about these injustices happening to me, happening to my peers, I could no longer just sit by and let other people fight and put themselves at risk, and then me have benefit in the future. I really thought I had a social responsibility, not only like to my parents, but to my sisters, to my friends, to be the one to say, I'm not going to let other people do this. I'm going to be the one to step up. And if I get arrested now, that could potentially change things for others in the future. So I made that conscious decision on January 9th. And I did get arrested, and it was not bad. So don't let anybody tell you that's the bad. But I do think that's the thing about being a leader. Growing up, I was not much of a leader, to be honest. I was kind of lame, kind of nerdy. Like, I sat in the back. I wasn't a leader by any means. But when I actually learned about what I could actually do and what I needed to do to change this, because it's very possible. As Miko said, we have met with many people who have shown us that they desegregated schools in the South before, and we could definitely do it again. And even just talking to them, you feel much better because you think, I really don't know what I'm doing right now. And honestly, they didn't either. They just believed in something, and they went with it. And it worked out because ultimately justice prevailed. And I mean, that might be a naive idea, but I do think that will happen. And so to be a leader and to be an activist, I think it really means to stand up, and despite all the fears you have, despite the apprehensions you have to just go for it. And so, as Miko said, it's not a coincidence that the students that you see in all these pictures and the students that are at all these events and these actions are Freedom U students. It's not a coincidence because in class it's where we really learn everything, basically, that throughout all our high school careers we were told that, the U.S. is great and everything, if you do all the right steps, you can go to college and you can get a good job. And you find out once you graduate that that's not the reality at all. I graduated and I had no plans for what I was going to do for my future because I wanted to go to UGA, but that's when I found out that I couldn't even apply. So all my dreams up to that point were basically shattered. And you basically wake up and you realize you were lied to your whole life. And going into Freedom U, that's when you really learn the reality and what you can actually do to change it. So as Freedom U students, we do have that responsibility to stand up and to not only educate others, other undocumented students that don't currently know, because when I was in high school, I didn't even know about the ban. I didn't know that I could do anything. I had no idea. So it's really our responsibility as people that are now conscious about what is actually happening. It's our responsibility to share that and to let other people know we need to stand up. I think I answered the questions. Sorry, I thought there was another question, but I think that's it.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call on Jacqueline now and ask her, Jacqueline, how has being involved with the university shaped your life? You being whacked up, I guess. Whacked up to change your life.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is it on? Okay. So, Freedom University has shaped me immensely. I'm going to start back into last year. I graduated in 2014 from Lovejoy High School. And I was pretty naive, I guess. I really thought I was going to go to college. That was my plans. Those were my hopes. And I didn't believe I couldn't. So despite everything that I was hearing, that undocumented students couldn't go to college and that a ban had been imposed on us, I still tried to apply, and my dream school was Georgia State. So I went on the website, and I couldn't even apply, so I was sort of wondering why. So I did my research, and on their website it said that undocumented students can't apply and couldn't get in. So I started researching more, and I found out that we couldn't even get into UGA or Georgia Tech or any of the other colleges. We didn't have in-state tuition for us, even if we did get accepted. So it was a pretty hard thing for me. Going through my senior year, I was looking at my friends. They were excited. They were dorm shopping. They were going off to college, and I was being left behind. And all my life, I had been with them. I knew them since elementary school. And despite us growing up together, I wasn't going to college like they were. So it was pretty hard. And so I became more involved in Freedom U, and thank God I did, because it literally saved me. It gave me hope and a purpose that I had lost when I graduated. So now I'm surrounded by peers and teachers and allies who are amazing, who have taught me a lot about our movement and who have fought with us and gave us the leadership we needed to fight for our education. So it's been amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gerardo, is that saying something about this? It's more going up on certain rooms in this. You don't really necessarily need it because your voice will carry, but it's wider.
I think I know most of you here, but I'll tell you a little bit of my story that some of you may not know. I'm from Zamora, Michoacan, Mexico, and in case you didn't know, the state where I'm from in Oregon, about half the Mexican people who live in the state come from the same state in Mexico. And the primary reason is because in the 1940s and 50s, Oregon recruited farm workers from Mexico to go to Oregon as farm laborers. So part of my history includes farm working in Mexico and farm working in Oregon. My grandparents came as guest workers to California, Oregon, and Washington since the 40s and 50s. My dad continued that tradition in the 70s and 80s. And when the 1986 IRCA Reform Act passed, my dad was able to qualify for himself to gain legal permanent residency. But he at the point where we, the kids, immigrated to Oregon in 1989, we were undocumented. All of us crossed the border illegally. We jumped that little river that's not really a river. And we settled in Oregon, and for me, the transition from undocumented to documented didn't happen until my sophomore year in high school. There was a clear shift in mindset as far as what my outlook in my life was, because prior to being documented, I felt hopeless. I felt like there was no future for me. I couldn't see a future worth fighting for in my immediate future at that point. So that transition from illegality to now I'm documented and have access to a whole bunch of more stuff really happened my sophomore year in high school, which at that point, I mean, it just literally changed my future. So that's where my passion for working with undocumented students stems from, because I have a lot of cousins who didn't have that opportunity, who come from the same families, who work in the same fields, who don't have access to federal financial aid, who can't drive a car legally. If they lived in another state, they would face different or similar challenges. Fast forward now to what I do at Linfield College. Somebody made the mistake and gave me the keys to the Office of Financial Aid and all of our money. So at this private liberal arts school, tuition for us is about $40,000 a year. And one of the first things that I did is I looked at all of our policies, and I went down the list and I started to see where in our policies it was difficult for undocumented students like myself. Many of the students who were at our school were struggling with. And right off the bat, one of the main issues was Social Security numbers. So we were just asking for a whole bunch of security numbers without having a real purpose. So the first thing that I did is I got rid of Social Security number requirements. We just used our own institutional IDs, and what that resulted in is that a lot of our undocumented students and potential students who we were trying to attract, it eliminated a real barrier because they didn't have Social Security numbers. The other thing I did, because we know we're not an Ivy League school, we're not a Harvard, we're not a Yale, we don't have huge endowments. We started telling student stories, and part of what I do, and I institutionalize it into my job requirements, into my job description, is to help students write and tell their stories. So part of the curriculum that I co-authored, I helped students tell their story in a way that we can monetize it. So every year I host 6-hour workshops on helping students tell their story in a written way. And the next year I measure how much money those students win in scholarships. Now this is a session both of documented and undocumented students. And any given fall I'll have a session of about 100 students in the workshop. The next year I measure how much money they win. How much money do you think these students win the next year in scholarships? Guess. 100 students. Anybody want to guess? $500,000. More. Roughly $1 million in scholarships. And what I quickly realized is that there's real monetary value in student stories. When you share your story and you move somebody, when you touch I always tell students, when you touch the reader's heart, you're going to touch their wallet. And that's what we were doing. And it's true. You tell a story that's going to move somebody to act, whether it's to give you money or to give you an opportunity, to give you something, it literally will change the reader's mind. And that's what I've learned works a lot in our institution, which claims to be very left, very liberal, and when they give somebody the keys like me, then we make change. Oregon, however, is not like California or Washington, where they charge students in-state tuition and also give them access to their state grant. Oregon only allows students to pay in-state tuition, but does not give students the Oregon, what we call the Oregon Opportunity Grant, which is $2,000. So we have a real battle fight at the Oregon statewide level, because students have the financial need, but they can't have access to it because the legislature hasn't affirmatively voted to open up the doors to undocumented students. So what we had to do at the institutional level is really find ways that we can open up our financial pockets to undocumented students, because at a school with $40,000 tuition, limited endowment, the financial barriers are the biggest barriers that undocumented students in our school are facing. There's other barriers that we know, and the other needs that students have: access to legal advice, access to academic support, access to social mentorships. There's just a whole wide array of need that we know we need. Every year we get letters from very conservative law firms who threaten to sue us because we're offering money and access to undocumented students. And when you have the support from the president to support undocumented students, we just throw those letters away because there's no one that's going to really sue us. We're giving private dollars to undocumented students, and the culture And the way of thinking that has shifted at our school is that if we admit a student, they are our student regardless of residency. So as long as we admit them, we are committed, and it's part of our mission to help our students regardless of residency. The challenge is getting in, because it's very competitive, and it's hard to provide students a lot of the financial support in order for them to be able to afford us. I could keep going on and on and on, but I was only given 10 minutes, and I want to give her an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Sorry about that noise. So, hello everyone, my name is Anaí Mendoza, and I guess I'm here kind of wearing two hats that really is one. Like was mentioned earlier, I am an undocumented student from Mexico. I came to the U.S. In 1997 when I was 4 years old. Still remember the plane ride with my mom. And I'm also the Director Emeritus of Act on a Dream, which is the Act on a Dream, which is an organization at the college, the undergrad level, which is dedicated to helping undocumented students while they're at the college. It's being a little funky. I'll just hold it. And so, like I was saying, two hats that are really one, because when, as you all were saying, advocating for undocumented students as an undocumented student is something that is very unique. And so I think how I got to Harvard is two things. One, I'm from California, which is a lot friendlier. And two, I think I'm kind of a good compartmentalizer. So while I was growing up, I always knew that I was undocumented, and going to family parties, we would always talk about being undocumented. But it wasn't something that I really gave much attention to until high school. And then when I finally was accepted to Harvard, it was something that I didn't have to, I thought, give much attention to. And so for a lot of us, once we get admitted to Harvard, it's kind of a different story, because we think that, the struggle was getting accepted, or the struggle was getting in, but now what? And so Act on a Dream was an organization that was developed in 2007, and its original mission was to advocate for immigration reform and to advocate for the DREAM Act. And so we started off sending letters to members of Congress, having phone banks, doing things like that, because Harvard awards students, as was mentioned, need blind financial aid, which means that the undocumented students at the college have full financial aid according to their economic background. And so there are about 40 undocumented students at the college, very diverse group of students, Latino students, African American students, Asian students, students from Southeast Asia, and there are about 10 per class, which isn't a quota, but I don't know what's going on in admissions. And so I guess the question I wanted to talk to you all about is what happens when you're at college and you are undocumented. And so what we found out at the college while we were advocating for the DREAM Act and things like that was that students of the college didn't have resources. And so there were a lot of students that are heads of households, which means that they are at the college, but then they also are providing money to their parents back home, work part-time jobs, sometimes even work more to provide for their parents. Students who have mental health issues, who are have anxiety and stress, and then also students whose parents are being deported. Harvard students whose parents are being deported, which makes an interesting headline. And so we found out that there were a lot of undocumented students at the college that were struggling, students who were taking time off and not being able to finish their Harvard degree. And so what we decided to do is that we needed to kind of, before we were advocating for other people, we needed to kind of take care of ourselves first and put on our oxygen mask first. And so we decided to start an undocumented student mentorship program, which pairs first years and sophomores with juniors and seniors, and also pairs seniors with undocumented grad students. There are about 5 undocumented grad students that we know of at the Kennedy School, at the School of Education, at the Divinity School, at the Medical School, at the School of Public Health. And so we developed this mentorship program. We advocated so that the administration would create a centralized administrator. When I first got to the college, there weren't any resources for undocumented students, and so if anyone needed anything, if anyone went to the bank and didn't know how to figure something out or didn't know how to submit their financial aid once they were already at the college, these questions were kind of going to me or to other students in the group. And so we decided that we really needed someone who knew all of the undocumented students at the college and would be able to provide these resources. And then also while here, the university expects students to have a part-time job or some sort of way for them to meet their basic needs, but it would be impossible to do that without DACA. And so we advocated for the financial aid office to develop grants so that students wouldn't have to pay for their DACA applications, because how could they if they weren't able to work before that. And then we also, once we kind of put on our oxygen masks, we created a scholarship database for undocumented students, a searchable database, which is on our website, actonadream.org, that has about 200 scholarships for undocumented students. And then we created a 100 or so page guide on how to apply to college if you're undocumented, and it's for high school students. And when we started doing that, we kind of realized that more undocumented students were coming out and sharing their stories. One of our members has a blog on the Huffington Post where she talks about being undocumented. And some students also began writing songs about their experience of being undocumented at the college. And so with that, our advocacy turned more to our original goals. We had our undergraduate council. We put a referendum on there that asked, should Harvard come out as an institution and support comprehensive immigration reform? And 80% of the students that voted said that it should. And so our current efforts are advocating, asking President Faust, who came out and supported the DREAM Act in 2009, to take another step and not just support dreamers, but also support parents. I think there's this great meme that captures it perfectly that says, our parents were the original dreamers. And during the fight for the DREAM Act, a lot of us kind of maybe threw our parents under the bus, right? The narrative was, we're not to blame for being here. Our parents brought us here. And now we're working on changing the narrative so that people know that it's also not their fault. And so we're asking President Faust to come out in support of immigration reform. We've talked to her in the past, and she's been kind of hesitant. She's in full support of students, and that's what she'll tell the media, but we really want to make sure that it's not just students, because our identities are more holistic. So being at Harvard is great, but what does that mean? What's going on back home? And so tomorrow you'll see we're starting our image campaign, which is advocating for the same issue. So you'll see images around campus of some of our members. And we're also writing in a letter to President Faust, which will be available through the Harvard Crimson, that's asking her to come out in support of comprehensive immigration reform. So, yeah, I think that's it.
Interesting presentations. We now open it up for questions and discussion from the floor. I guess you're sitting listening to everybody, so think about it coming to the front. But actually, you can all see people, can't you? So you might as well stay there and answer questions from where you are. So if you're speaking from the floor, if you want to come and talk to the microphone, please do so. If you have the kind of voice that carries, don't feel you have to come to the microphone, because your voice will be heard by the recording system. But if you want to use the microphone, so who'd like to start with comments or questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for excellent
presentations to all of you and for your courage. I mean, I can't believe of anything more important for a young person to have so much courage that is willing to get arrested and incarcerated, and all the consequences of dealing with cops these days. But that courage, like someone that has someone with parental hat, legal hat, your legal advice about being arrested and being undocumented to begin with. What is it okay to go through the process? And once you try to get your legal papers in order, will that make an impact on your admissions?
Who'd like to answer?
I guess I will. I actually am very fortunate enough to have DACA, so I'm not going to actually get deported for the fact that I got arrested. I was very fortunate in the fact that the actual charges that we got charged with are only misdemeanor. Well, we actually haven't been charged with anything yet. We're still going through trial. We were charged, but we're not convicted of anything yet. Hopefully they will be dropped. But if we were to get convicted, it would only be a misdemeanor, which could get cleared off our record. So the actual repercussions are not too great, or I don't see them as too great. They're definitely something I could deal with for a greater outcome that should come out of this. But as I said, I think the sacrifice I think is really worth it. And I know my mom, she was furious when she found out, because I promised her that morning that I was not going to get arrested, and then she finds out from my sister that I'm in jail. So she was furious, but she was really just more concerned as to what it would mean for my future, as you said. And she told me what a lot of people probably their concerns are, that you already kind of have a stain on your record being undocumented. It's already hard for you. So, are you going to add another one? And I told her straight up, I was, Mom, if anyone's going to look at this situation and be like, you did the wrong thing and getting arrested for this cause, that's not the type of person I want to associate myself with. I wouldn't want to go to that institution, or I wouldn't want to go to that job or work there. So, I mean, ultimately, I feel good about it. So,
thank you very much. Next question.
Yes.
I guess sort of on that same note, I'm curious about parent involvement, parents who are very supportive, and how do they get involved with Freedom U?
I guess I will also answer that, because my mom is she was very mad, but to be honest, my mom is very, very, very involved with Freedom U. She's always on Facebook, and she's always sharing her things, always sharing her pictures. She's a Facebook mom. So she's very involved, and it's just, honestly, my mom, she was involved with immigrant rights before I was, but not extensively. And I think when she saw that we got involved with it, she was actually the person who told me about Freedom University. She actually saw it on Facebook. And she was like, you guys should really go to this. And I was just like, I don't know, sounds kind of sketchy, right? But ultimately we went, and to be honest, my mom has been with me every step of the way. She's the person who, parents don't get enough praise in this, because they're really the ones that are, before we got DACA, before we could drive, they were the ones taking us places, risking their lives to get us out there, and really they're the ones that instilled this fight that we have in us. And really everything I do it for my parents, because I know ultimately I wanted to pay off the big sacrifice that they did. I wanted to pay off. So I mean, my parents are very involved. They try to be, just because they know that this is our future in our hands. This isn't just something we can brush off. This is very much our future that's going to change because of what we change.
Thank you. Any question? Yes.
Yes, so I'm a writer, among many other things, and when I first learned about this, maybe it was 4 years ago when you guys first started, became obsessed with it because from a story point of view, it is just an incredibly moving story. And I'm just wondering that I feel like has so much power, like you were talking about the power of stories that the students has, that has so much power, I think, to kind of change people's perceptions and, bring, increase the numbers of allies that you have and get people who don't think about immigrant rights necessarily to suddenly understand it in a really human way. And I know that you have a lot of support, like I saw it on Colbert, that was really exciting, and Junot Diaz. But are you guys chronicling this? And this is a wonderful presentation and everything, but is somebody kind of documenting everything that's happening in some sort of systematic way? And have you had interest from people who want to tell your stories or help you tell your stories? Because it's just like you were talking about how you're working with the SNCC folks and how, I don't know, I just am blown away by it. So I have nothing articulate to say. Except
and to clarify, I started at Freedom U in fall 2013, so I started in its third year. And it's scary almost, like how in just 4 years, some of the early history is unknown. Like, I talked to a lot of people who are at the first meeting, they can't really remember it. I'm just like, but I want to know. I'm doing my best to document the last 2 years. But honestly, things at Freedom U always feel frantic. Like, we're always putting out fires, whether it's deportations, arrests, trying to get into college, SAT fees, book fees, finding a safe space, volunteer drivers. Like, it's crazy. I worked for 15 months without pay, which is really hard, and then grant writing on top of that. So we have one paid staff, right? And in terms of storytelling, we incorporate it in some way into our classes. I don't think you guys know this yet, but our summer plans, we're more or less scheduled around the academic calendar, but we've never met in the summer. And we're hoping to have a short summer session in July where we're going to make a photo book that's both students' photography and their stories, right? So it will at least help document the students' stories, but I would say it feels a little too frantic right now to be really systematic about documenting everything that's going on. I do have 8,000 photos on my phone, so I think somewhere it's a start. I take photos all the time, and so at least photographically, I think it's being documented, but it would be great if there was just another person who had time and resources to do a more thorough.
So have you gotten media attention? I know you've gotten some media attention, but like national media attention that you feel happy with too. Like, that's the thing. And once you put it out there, you not necessarily control it.
Not any comprehensive story, right?
Yeah.
There was a good Huffington Post piece about the January 9th action that was written by Stephen Bendio, which was good for the January 9th action, but nothing really comprehensive as far as the story is concerned. There is a documentary photography team that has been following this since spring of 2014.
Oh, that's great.
And really focusing, I think, on 5 or 6 students, but coming to our class a lot to see action. But that sounds like a really good dissertation project.
I'm done with mine. It's also a book project.
It's a not to be. This sounds really tawdry, but this is a bestseller.
It's also interesting that I found that the link with the previous generation, the SNCC people, who were doing this kind of thing in the 60s. I think that's right. That's an amazing kind of thing. And we have a couple of photos. Brian, yes.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about that link between the 60s and today. And in the 60s, the framework for sort of enlarging the movement and getting the movement going was civil rights. And I'm wondering, and now I see, right in the slide, it says the human rights framework is kind of the organizing framework. And I was wondering what you see as that going forward, because on Monday, this past Monday, we had another presentation about immigration and about undocumented students, and the speaker was saying that the human rights framework, isn't really that established in the U.S. It's more of a European type of framework, and so I'm just wondering if human rights is a framework that you see as uniting people across the country, or if there's other ways that you're going to try to unite a movement across the country.
I feel like I'm in my comps, actually. My social movement comps. If you don't mind me trying to answer that first. Well, to be honest, I've always kind of wanted to investigate the question because the civil rights movement was much more than that. It wasn't just about non-discrimination, right? It was about I'm a man, I'm a human being. And in Atlanta in particular, the Atlanta student movement that I keep on referencing, which was an affiliate of SNCC, but they were kind of independent. They wanted to be known as Atlanta student movement. I would check the date, but I think March or May 1960, the Atlanta student movement took out a page in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that said an appeal for human rights. They framed it as a human rights movement from the very beginning, right? What were the forces that changed it into a civil rights framework to pass civil rights legislation? You know, that's another dissertation topic. But I would say on the ground, students at that time were using the human rights framework. But larger, more professional organizations, I think, kind of started the framing in civil rights language. For fear that it would be, it wasn't much longer after McCarthyism and the Red State, right? And human rights having economic, social, and cultural rights, blacks are seen as being communists, right? And throughout the South, that was the term used and still used today. I've been called a Marxist about just like in Georgia because I work with economic. I know, me, I'm Marxist. And so understanding that history too of how Red Scare, economic justice, workers' rights has been used against communities of color and to scare them into a narrow, more political or civil rights framework. So to be clear, historically, especially in Atlanta, the human rights framework has been used the entire time. I think we use it because, in addition to a legal framework, it at its core is about dignity, that you have rights regardless of whether a government respects them. And I think that that's really important for undocumented students who don't have technical citizenship rights. You know, and I think that in transforming of how someone thinks of themselves, a human rights framework is much more powerful. Maybe you guys can answer that too.
I think we can take one more question, perhaps, before we finish. Yes.
I have a question. I guess it can go to any of you, but the story that I often hear, which seems like, when is it early enough to start? Because how can we help students that are not yet in high school, that are in middle school, that are as early as elementary school, when they're beginning to, if they are not aware the whole time that they are undocumented, when they begin to find out what the limitations of being undocumented can bring to that moment when they're in high school and deciding on or not whether they want to apply to college and whether they can do that. What kind of tools from the freedom you or from your own life experiences do you think can help other students or teachers who are working in the public schools become that support for students to really think up beyond this discourse that's imposed upon them rather than creating a new narrative for themselves?
I'll say something on that. Me personally, I think that having the discussion, first of all, in class would help a lot. I went to a meeting for America where teachers actually wanted to know about our situation, about undocumented students, and they were wondering how they could incorporate it into their lessons or find a way to relate it to their subject matters. And surprisingly, there were a lot of ways to do that without technically going out of the curriculum, but just like simply mentioning it and going over it. I think at a young age would be really powerful.
Well, I'd like to thank the fantastic panel, very brave and very energized. And I hope that, I know you've inspired us all, and I hope that in some way we can help you in the future. I gather you're talking to the law school on Friday, so I guess with a combination of education and law, it will change the world. Thank you. Those of you who have time to eat plenty of food, please someone take it.
Yeah, I will. We're working.
I realized why it's so much of a friend.
Yeah, it's amazing. Wait, where exactly were you?
I was in Los Angeles and then we drove up the coast.
Where did you drive on Route 1? Along the Big Sur? I would make the drive like all the time, and I would always think that it was awful. It's much faster though.
Right.
Really well. Which is very fast. Got everything so together. tell us what you are. Which is interesting to her.